Welcome, beloved anointed ones. The fastest way to expose a lie is to let it run unchecked. It always trips over itself. What most people don't realize is that life doesn't always change slowly. Sometimes it flips so fast it leaves everyone dizzy, confused, and scrambling for footing. One day you're the easiest target in the room. The next day, the air around you feels different. Conversations stop mid-sentence when you walk in. Certain people suddenly develop memory loss. Others start acting polite in a way that feels forced, like they're reading from a script they don't understand. That's not coincidence, that's correction in motion. Here's a real, uncomfortable fact. Studies in organizational psychology show that once a false group narrative is challenged by verified patterns and evidence, authority figures reverse positions abruptly, not gradually. They don't ease into fairness. They switch sides overnight to protect themselves. That's exactly why these shifts feel so dramatic. Justice doesn't whisper when it finally shows up. It rearranges the furniture. What makes this moment wild is that you didn't campaign for sympathy, didn't beg to be believed, and didn't perform for approval. You stayed standing while the story around you kept changing. And that's the part nobody expected. People are prepared for collapse, chaos, tears, or retaliation. What they're not prepared for is someone who survives quietly and keeps their integrity intact. That kind of survival makes powerful observers uncomfortable because it forces them to look closer. And when someone finally looks closer, everything changes fast. Not because you suddenly became important, but because someone realized the cost of ignoring the truth was higher than the cost of defending it. That's when protection activates, not loudly, not publicly, but decisively. There's a little humor in it too, if we're being honest. The same people who swore nothing would ever change are now acting like they always knew you were innocent. The switch-up is so fast, it deserves whiplash compensation. Yesterday you were overreacting. Today you're misunderstood. Tomorrow they'll say they always respected you. Sure, of course. So if things around you feel like they flipped without warning, understand this. Someone stepped in. Someone saw through the noise. Someone decided the game had gone far enough. And once that decision is made, the atmosphere shifts immediately. This isn't luck. This isn't timing. This is correction. Stay with me. Because what's happening now isn't just protection. It's the quiet beginning of a full reversal. Number 1. The shift wasn't random. It happened the moment someone finally saw the whole picture. What people call a sudden change is usually the end of a long misunderstanding. Nothing flipped overnight because of luck or fate. It flipped because someone finally stopped listening to fragments and started paying attention to the full sequence of events. When that happens, the truth doesn't need defending. It defends itself. For a long time, you were judged through edited clips of your life. Pieces taken out of context, reactions without causes, conclusions drawn before the facts were even checked. That's how false narratives survive. They don't need to be strong. They just need to be repeated by enough mouths. And for a while, that worked against you. But patterns don't lie. When someone with discernment looks closely, they don't focus on who speaks the loudest. They watch timelines. They notice who stays consistent under pressure and who keeps changing their story. They notice who benefits from chaos and who keeps losing while still standing. That's when the fog clears. The moment someone saw the entire pattern, the story they were told stopped making sense. They realized that what they were given wasn't the truth. It was a version designed to protect someone else. And once that realization hits, it's impossible to unsee. You don't slowly drift away from a lie you've fully recognized. You step out of it immediately. That's why the shift felt sharp. There was no gradual warming, no soft transition. One decision corrected months or years of misunderstanding. The defender didn't need more time because time wasn't the issue. Clarity was. What's powerful about this is that you didn't have to prove anything. You didn't chase explanations or demand fairness. Your life, your reactions, and your restraint told the story on your behalf. Someone simply connected the dots that others avoided. So when everything changed, it wasn't magic. It was alignment. The truth finally landed in the right mind, and once it did, the game changed permanently. Number 2. Your endurance triggered protection, not pity. Endurance is a quiet kind of power that most people overlook. You didn't shout about your struggles, you didn't parade your pain, and you certainly didn't dramatize every slight. You survived in silence, under pressure that would have broken others, and that kind of resilience doesn't go unnoticed by the right eyes. What happens is subtle, but its impact is seismic. People start to recognize strength in ways they never expected, and suddenly, someone decides you're worth defending. Not because they feel sorry for you, but because they respect what you survived. This protection isn't a result of luck or timing. It's a reaction to a rare quality that most people confuse with weakness. When someone sees that you've endured betrayals, manipulations, and attacks without losing yourself, without becoming someone desperate or desperate-looking, it forces them to adjust their calculations. You are no longer just another participant in a story. You are the axis around which the story is actually turning. They realize that your survival isn't fragile. It's strategic. And when someone realizes that the balance of risk is on their side if they defend you, they act fast. The difference between pity and protection is enormous. Pity is passive. It feels sorry for you but doesn't intervene. Protection is active. It creates consequences for anyone who even thinks about crossing you. And the moment someone transitions from passive observation to active intervention, the world around you flips. People who underestimated your endurance find themselves suddenly on the defensive, confused about how the tides turned so abruptly. The most fascinating part is that you didn't force this moment. You didn't appeal for intervention or manipulate anyone into seeing your side. You simply carried on, stayed consistent, and remained unshakable. That alone is enough to trigger someone who has both the awareness and the capacity to defend. They respond because your endurance highlighted their own responsibility. Suddenly ignoring you or letting you be harmed is no longer acceptable. Endurance doesn't just keep you standing, it forces others to take action, to step in, and to recalibrate how they deal with the situation. And that is why protection arrives, not out of sympathy, but out of recognition for the power you've silently wielded all along. Number 3. Someone recognized that harming you would cost them more than protecting you. There's a hard truth most people don't want to admit. Protection doesn't happen because someone likes you or thinks you're innocent. It happens because someone finally calculates the real cost of letting harm come to you and realizes it's far higher than the cost of defending you. Once that realization hits, everything shifts. Actions that once seemed random or delayed suddenly make perfect sense. The sudden flip in energy around you isn't accidental, it's strategic. People who decide to defend aren't acting on emotion, they're acting on consequences. Every slight, every attempt to undermine you, every rumor or manipulation that was directed at you didn't just affect you. It created potential fallout for anyone invested in the system around you. The moment someone with insight connects the dots and sees that the instability caused by harming you could backfire on them personally or professionally, intervention becomes inevitable. They step in, not out of charity, but out of calculation. This kind of defense is precise, intentional, and immediate. The flip seems sudden because the moment of awareness is sudden. Once someone internalizes the fact that ignoring injustice or allowing harm against you carries more risk than protecting you, they act. and they act decisively. They don't just intervene, they prevent further damage and shift the environment so that anyone who might have tried to exploit or attack you realizes the stakes have changed. What's extraordinary is that this moment doesn't require your effort. You don't have to plead, explain, or even demonstrate loyalty. The evidence is already there, in your consistency, your resilience, and the imbalance caused by the people who sought to bring you down. All it takes is for someone capable to notice the math, to see that tipping the scales in your favor is safer than letting the chaos continue. When this happens, the shift feels dramatic, almost instantaneous. The environment itself realigns because someone has weighed the risk and chosen protection over harm. It's a silent but undeniable power, one that rewrites the rules around you without you having to ask for a single thing. This is why the energy changes, why people act differently, and why, suddenly, you're being defended in ways you never expected. Number 4. The narrative collapsed faster than expected. What shocked everyone wasn't that the story about you was wrong. It was how quickly it fell apart once someone actually looked at it properly. For a long time, the narrative survived because it was never examined as a whole. It lived in pieces, half-statements, repeated assumptions, emotional reactions passed off as facts. As long as nobody lined everything up side by side, the story looked solid enough to stand. But once someone did that, it didn't just weaken, it folded. The timeline didn't match the accusations. The reactions didn't match the claims. The outcomes didn't match the intentions people said you had. Too many gaps appeared all at once, and gaps make people nervous. Especially people who thought the story was airtight. What really caused the collapse was speed. Lies can survive time, but they can't survive scrutiny. The moment details were checked instead of echoed, the narrative couldn't keep up. Explanations started changing. Justifications became messy. People contradicted themselves without realizing it, and when that happens, credibility drains fast. This is why the shift felt abrupt. 1 minute, you were boxed into a version of events that didn't reflect reality, and the next minute, that box didn't exist anymore. Not because you broke out of it, but because the walls were never real to begin with. They were made of agreement, not truth. The people who benefited from the false narrative felt this collapse first. That's why their behavior changed so noticeably. Defensiveness crept in. Over-explaining replaced confidence. Suddenly, they were managing impressions instead of controlling the story. When a narrative collapses, the people who relied on it scramble, because they have nothing solid to stand on anymore. What's important to understand is that this wasn't slow erosion. It was structural failure. One clear look at the full picture did more damage than years of quiet resistance ever could. And once that collapse happens, there's no rebuilding it the same way. Too many people have now seen the cracks. That's why everything around you shifted so fast. The story holding you back didn't fade, it failed. And when a false narrative collapses, protection doesn't take long to follow. Number 5. Your consistency exposed everyone else's inconsistency. Consistency is a quiet kind of spotlight. While others around you are fluctuating, reacting, over-explaining, or bending to pressures, you remain steady. You don't need to perform, argue, or justify yourself constantly. You show up the same way every time, no matter how chaotic the environment gets, and that simple fact becomes impossible to ignore. It's not flashy, it's not loud, but it's devastatingly revealing. People who thought they were hiding flaws suddenly look unstable next to someone who refuses to break or bend with every gust of drama. When someone finally notices this, it's like a chain reaction. The inconsistencies that everyone else relied on to manipulate perception or control narratives become glaringly obvious. Contradictions, hidden motives, and unpredictable behaviors that were once background noise are suddenly center stage. Your steadiness acts as a mirror, reflecting their chaos back at them, and the effect is immediate. Those who tried to discredit you now look like the unreliable ones. The longer your consistency continues, the more stark the contrast becomes, and the less credibility the opposition has. This isn't about perfection, it's about reliability under pressure. You don't need to be flawless, you only need to maintain alignment with your truth, while the world around you fractures. That alignment forces observers, especially those with influence, to take note. They see who survives pressure without losing control and who can't, and that comparison changes everything. Suddenly, defending you isn't optional. It becomes necessary because the inconsistencies around you are now a liability to anyone who ignored or underestimated you. Consistency also builds trust faster than words ever could. People who once hesitated, questioned, or doubted now feel compelled to act in your favor. They can measure you against others and instantly see where the risk lies, and where the loyalty and reliability lie. Your quiet reliability doesn't just protect you in the long term, it forces the environment to recalibrate. Those who were loud, erratic, or deceptive can no longer hide. Your consistency isn't just admirable. It's a weapon that exposes the weaknesses of everyone who tried to undermine you. And that's why the shift around you happens so fast and so dramatically. Number 6. Someone finally understood that you were the constant variable, not the problem. One of the most overlooked truths in conflict and chaos is the power of consistency. People often assume that the loudest reactions or the biggest disruptions define reality. They look for someone to blame, someone to label as the problem, and they rarely step back to examine the actual patterns. But when someone with insight finally does, they notice that while chaos swirled around you, your actions, integrity, and choices never wavered. You remained the same, while everything else shifted, faltered, or contradicted itself. That realization changes the game entirely. Being the constant variable isn't glamorous. It's invisible to most, which is why you can endure so much without anyone noticing the full weight of what you've been through. You don't need to argue or defend yourself constantly. You simply exist reliably, and over time, your presence alone exposes instability around you. People start to realize that all the failures, inconsistencies, and manipulations didn't originate with you. They originated with those trying to control or misrepresent you. When someone finally sees this clearly, it's like a switch flips. They no longer treat you as a liability or a threat. They recognize that any issue attributed to you was never really about you. It was about the environment, the choices of others, and their own flawed assumptions. That recognition demands correction. Suddenly, someone capable of influence steps in. They don't just passively acknowledge the truth, they act on it because ignoring it would be a mistake. This shift is dramatic because it overturns deeply ingrained perceptions. Those who previously manipulated, judged, or attacked you are now exposed. Their narratives collapse under the weight of your consistency, and someone with authority or power moves decisively to restore balance. You don't need to fight for it. Your constancy has already done the work. Being the constant variable is a quiet kind of victory, but it carries enormous consequences. It forces the truth to the surface, triggers protection, and ensures that anyone who underestimated you finally sees reality. And once that truth is acknowledged, the environment around you can never return to its previous chaos. Because you were never the problem, and now finally someone sees it. Number 7. The defender didn't announce themselves because real power doesn't posture. When protection arrives, it rarely comes with fanfare. The person stepping in doesn't feel the need to broadcast their intervention or make a show of their authority. Real power operates quietly, decisively, and with precision. It's invisible until the consequences appear, and that's exactly why the shift around you feels sudden and dramatic. No one saw the move being made, but everyone immediately felt the change. Doors open, whispers stop, and certain people who once acted without fear now hesitate. That's the hallmark of a protector who doesn't need approval or recognition. Their impact is enough. The most striking part of this kind of defense is how targeted it is. It doesn't sweep indiscriminately. It's not about making everyone like you or enforcing morality. It's about intervention with surgical accuracy. The people who threatened, manipulated, or spread false narratives find themselves subtly restricted or redirected. Their usual tactics fail, not because the defender is visible, but because their influence carries weight behind the scenes. Someone with insight and authority has calculated the risks and decided that protecting you is the smartest move, and they do it without needing applause. This silence amplifies the effect. People who were loud in their attacks suddenly become cautious, unsure, and defensive. They realize something has changed, even if they can't pinpoint exactly what. Meanwhile, you continue unaffected because your role hasn't changed. You're still consistent, still grounded, still surviving. The defender doesn't need to announce themselves. Their presence is already felt through the shifts in behavior around you. There's also a subtle psychological effect at play. Those who tried to manipulate or discredit you now question their own strategy. Their overconfidence falters. Their assumptions crumble. The defender doesn't engage in drama, but the consequences of their protection ripple through the environment faster than anyone could have anticipated. Protection that doesn't posture is devastatingly effective. It doesn't rely on noise or recognition. It simply recalibrates the balance of power in your favor. The shift feels abrupt and overwhelming because it is calculated, precise, and invisible until it's already complete. That's why the energy around you changed overnight. Someone stepped in, and they didn't need to make a scene for anyone to notice. Number 8. The people who targeted you underestimated how traceable their behavior was. Most people think they can manipulate, deceive, or attack without leaving a mark. They act like what they do in private won't ever surface or be noticed by anyone who actually matters. That assumption is what allowed them to operate freely for so long. But every action, every attempt to twist the truth, every underhanded move leaves a trail. And the moment someone with awareness and insight traces that trail, everything changes. What once felt safe for your detractors suddenly becomes risky, dangerous even, because their behavior is no longer hidden. It's fully visible to someone who can act. This is why the environment around you flipped so suddenly. The people who thought they were untouchable didn't account for observation beyond the surface level. They relied on assumptions, that no one was paying attention, that their manipulations wouldn't be connected, that their influence would protect them. But once a sharp observer starts mapping out timelines, actions, and inconsistencies, those assumptions collapse. The truth isn't just revealed, it becomes undeniable. What's more, the traces left behind aren't vague hints. They're patterns that expose intent, reveal motives, and make it clear who has been acting in bad faith. The irony is brutal. While they were trying to control the narrative, they were writing it for someone else to read, someone capable, someone willing to step in. And that's exactly what triggered the rapid flip you're experiencing. Suddenly, their past attacks don't give them leverage. They give your defender ammunition. Every lie, every exaggeration, every attempt to discredit you becomes evidence against them. Their overconfidence turns into vulnerability. By underestimating how traceable their behavior was, they handed the advantage to the person who finally decided to protect you. That protection didn't just appear randomly. It was activated the moment someone saw the full pattern and realized the danger of ignoring it. Your detractor's own miscalculations created the conditions for your sudden defense. What looked like a shocking overnight shift was actually the inevitable result of their exposure, and it left them scrambling while you stood unaffected, finally shielded by the clarity they never saw coming. Number 9. Your restraint forced someone else to step in aggressively. There's a strange assumption people make when they see restraint. They think it means weakness, fear, or a lack of options. They assume that if you're not reacting loudly, you must not be capable of reacting at all. That misunderstanding is what allowed things to go as far as they did. But restraint, real restraint, is one of the loudest signals of strength there is, and the right person knows how to read it. You absorbed pressure without exploding. You didn't rush to defend yourself every time you were provoked. You didn't match chaos with chaos. Instead, you stayed measured while things around you grew messier. That didn't go unnoticed. Someone watching closely understood something important. If someone can remain that controlled while being pushed, then the situation itself must be crossing a line. Your calm didn't minimize the damage being done. It highlighted it. That's where the intervention began, because restraint creates contrast. When one person remains grounded while others escalate, it exposes imbalance. It makes the aggression, manipulation, and unfair treatment look exactly like what it is. And once that imbalance becomes clear to someone with authority or influence, they don't stay neutral. Neutrality becomes irresponsible. You didn't force their hand with demands or drama. You forced it by refusing to become reckless. Your self-control made it obvious that if you were pushed any further, the situation would turn into something far worse. The person who stepped in didn't do so gently because gentleness had already failed. They moved decisively to stop the escalation that others had mistaken for tolerance. That's why the shift felt intense. When someone intervenes on behalf of a restrained person, they often do it with force, not because they're emotional, but because they're correcting a prolonged imbalance. Your restraint gave them clarity. It showed them exactly where the line was crossed and who crossed it. The irony is that the very thing people misjudged about you, your refusal to react impulsively, became the reason protection arrived so strongly. You didn't need to swing back to prove a point. Your restraint already did. And once someone saw that clearly, they stepped in hard, ending what never should have been allowed to continue. Number 10. This defense isn't emotional. It's surgical. When protection shows up around you, it often feels sudden, overwhelming, and almost too precise to be real. That's because it isn't based on emotion or reaction. It's based on calculated intervention. The person defending you doesn't act out of sympathy, anger, or drama. They act with exactness, targeting the specific points of pressure, the exact people, and the exact narratives that have been working against you. It's not about making a show or sending a warning. It's about fixing the imbalance in a way that changes everything in the environment without wasting effort. That precision is what makes it feel so shocking when it happens. Unlike emotional reactions, which are messy and unpredictable, surgical defense is deliberate. It isolates the problem, addresses it directly, and neutralizes the threat efficiently. The people who thought they had free rein suddenly find themselves limited. Doors they expected to remain open quietly close. Words they expected to carry weight suddenly fall flat. And all of it happens without fanfare or public declarations. The effectiveness of this kind of intervention is hidden, but the results are undeniable. The fascinating part is how quickly the shift becomes visible, even though the action behind the scenes is subtle. Manipulators, attackers, and false narrators immediately sense the change. They don't need to be told what's happening. They feel it in the way their influence no longer works, in the hesitation creeping into conversations, and in the sudden inability to push or manipulate you. They can't trace it back to emotion because there isn't any. It's strategy, not reaction. This type of defense also protects you in ways you might not even see. It stabilizes the environment, neutralizes potential threats before they escalate, and recalibrates the balance of power around you. Everything that seemed like chaos now feels contained, not because luck intervened, but because someone with the ability and awareness acted precisely where it mattered. Surgical defense is quiet, precise, and deadly effective. It doesn't ask for acknowledgement or reward. It simply shifts reality in your favor, exposing who has been against you and ensuring that protection arrives exactly where it's needed, at exactly the right time. Number 11. Someone realized you were being tested unfairly, not challenged naturally. There's a huge difference between pressure that builds strength and pressure meant to break someone. Most people around you assumed your struggles were normal challenges, part of life's tests everyone faces. They convinced themselves that if you were suffering, it must be for your own growth or mistakes. But someone with insight finally saw through the illusion. They realized that what you were dealing with wasn't a natural test of character. It was an orchestrated effort to see how far you could be pushed, manipulated, or humiliated. That recognition alone changes everything. When someone sees that clearly, the response isn't casual. It's immediate and intentional. They understand that your endurance isn't just patience, it's survival under conditions nobody should be subjected to. They realize that the people putting you through these pressures weren't helping you grow. They were exploiting you, testing limits that had nothing to do with your development. That kind of realization triggers intervention, because leaving someone exposed to unfair trials is no longer tolerable once it's fully understood. The beauty of this moment is that it reframes everything that happened before. Suddenly, the patterns of who caused harm, who manipulated events, and who benefited from your struggles become obvious. The narrative flips. You're no longer just a participant enduring challenges. You're the person who survived an orchestrated environment designed to break you. And someone with the ability to act on that truth moves decisively to correct it. This kind of recognition also carries weight for those who underestimated you. People who thought your suffering was normal or deserved now realize it was intentional. The injustice becomes undeniable. That's why defense arrives so sharply and feels sudden. It's not because of luck or chance. It's because someone finally drew the line between natural pressure and deliberate exploitation and decided to intervene before it escalated any further. Being subjected to unfair tests doesn't just reveal your strength. It attracts the right attention, the kind of protection that shifts dynamics overnight. When someone sees the difference between a real challenge and manipulation, they don't hesitate. They act, and that action is precise, decisive, and irreversible. Number 12. The overnight flip shocked people because they thought you were alone. One of the reasons the shift around you felt so sudden is because the people who targeted you assumed you were isolated, unsupported, and powerless. They counted on the idea that no one was watching closely enough to notice patterns, motives, or the inconsistencies in their actions. They believed that you were entirely on your own, vulnerable, and easy to manipulate. That assumption gave them confidence, and it's exactly why the flip caught them off guard, because someone they didn't see or anticipate was already watching, analyzing, and ultimately deciding to intervene. The reality is that being alone is rarely what it seems. Even when it feels like nobody is standing with you, the truth is that your consistency, endurance, and the clarity of your actions have already attracted the attention of people capable of protecting you. These aren't casual allies or emotional supporters. They are observers with insight, influence, and the ability to act strategically. They don't need to be visible for you to be defended, and that's exactly why the shift seems instantaneous to those who miscalculated. This misconception that you were unprotected gave your detractors a false sense of control. They didn't anticipate the consequences of their own actions being tracked, mapped, and evaluated by someone with the power to correct the imbalance. Their arrogance became their blind spot because they assumed isolation equals vulnerability, when in reality it often signals focus, resilience, and visibility to the right eyes. The flip feels shocking because the protection arrived quietly and efficiently, but it was deliberate and inevitable. Those who underestimated you are forced to confront the fact that someone has been monitoring everything they've done wrong, weighing the risks, and deciding that enough is enough. They misjudged the situation completely, thinking you were alone, when in fact the right person had already aligned behind you, ready to intervene. Being underestimated in this way always works in your favor. What appeared as sudden, overnight protection is really the consequence of your quiet strength and the vigilance of someone who refuses to let injustice continue. That's why the energy shifted so sharply, and why those who assumed they could control the narrative are now scrambling to adjust. Number 13. Your survival embarrassed the ones who tried to erase you. There's a special kind of humiliation that comes when someone puts effort into breaking you and fails. Not a quiet failure, a visible one. They expected you to collapse, retreat, or disappear. They expected exhaustion to finish what manipulation started. Instead, you stayed, you endured, you kept your footing when the pressure was designed to make you vanish. That survival wasn't just inconvenient for them, it was embarrassing. The embarrassment comes from exposure. Your continued presence forced everyone to see that the attempts to erase you didn't work. That means the problem was never your weakness, it was their miscalculation. Every day you remained intact, you quietly proved that their strategy was flawed, their influence overrated, and their assumptions wrong. And people who rely on control hate being proven wrong without confrontation. What made it worse for them is that you didn't survive loudly. You didn't gloat. You didn't announce victories or demand apologies. You simply existed, steady and unbroken, which is the most uncomfortable outcome for someone who wanted you gone. Your survival became a living contradiction to everything they said about you. That contradiction doesn't fade, it grows. Once someone with authority noticed this, the embarrassment shifted sides. The focus stopped being on whether you deserved protection and started being on why you were targeted in the first place. That's when correction begins. Because embarrassment doesn't just bruise egos, it triggers damage control. Someone steps in to clean up the mess, not for drama, but to restore order and credibility. This is why the energy around you changed. The people who tried to erase you now have to coexist with proof of their failure. They can't rewrite the outcome. They can't undo your endurance. And someone else is now actively balancing the scales, not out of sympathy for you, but to contain the fallout of their failed attempt. Survival in this context isn't passive, it's disruptive. It forces accountability without confrontation. And that's why your presence now carries weight. You didn't just make it through, you exposed the limits of their power. And that kind of embarrassment always invites intervention, because once failure becomes visible, someone has to correct it. Number 14. This defense marks the end of your exposure phase. For a long time you were being watched, tested and judged in ways that felt relentless. Every move, every choice, every reaction was observed, dissected, and interpreted. That phase of exposure isn't punishment. It's a measure of your endurance and integrity. It's a period designed to reveal whether you will remain intact when the world is stacked against you, and whether you can carry the weight of truth without bending to pressure. Most people never realize when they've exited this phase, but the moment it ends, Everything around them changes instantly. The shift is sudden because protection doesn't wait for fanfare. Once someone capable recognizes that you've passed the test, they step in decisively. That phase of observation, where others assumed they could manipulate or intimidate you, ends because it becomes clear that you're untouchable in the ways that matter. Your actions, your consistency, and your endurance have proven that you aren't just surviving, you're operating from a place of control that others underestimated. That realization triggers intervention, not out of sympathy, but because your presence now demands it. This stage is also a turning point for everyone who underestimated you. Those who believed exposure would eventually lead to collapse are forced to recalibrate. The energy shifts, conversations change, and power dynamics are rearranged. The protection you receive isn't temporary or conditional. It's the natural response to a system that recognizes balance must be restored. People who once thought they could monitor, judge, or manipulate you without consequence are suddenly aware that their influence has limits. What makes this moment extraordinary is that you don't have to act to create it. Your endurance has done the work for you. By staying consistent, grounded, and unbroken, you've proven your strength silently. The exposure phase ends because someone capable has now seen everything clearly, and the protective energy that follows is precise, decisive, and irreversible. From this point forward, the narrative surrounding you changes. You're no longer being watched to see if you'll fail. You're being defended because you've passed. That's why the environment around you feels different overnight. The exposure is over, and protection has taken its rightful place. Conclusion. Everything that's happened, all the shifts, all the sudden flips in energy around you, isn't random. It's a precise sequence of cause and effect that started with your endurance, your consistency, and your refusal to bend under pressure. Every person who underestimated you, every manipulation aimed at controlling or discrediting you, every false narrative and every challenge they thought would break you, all of it has led to this exact moment. The truth has finally been recognized by someone who matters, someone with insight, influence, and the power to intervene, and that recognition has changed everything overnight. What's remarkable is how quietly and decisively this protection operates. It doesn't rely on announcements, speeches, or displays of power. It's surgical, targeted, and unmistakable in its results. The people who thought they had the upper hand are now scrambling. The chaos they relied on to control or intimidate you has collapsed. Your endurance exposed inconsistencies. Your consistency revealed who was unreliable. Your restraint highlighted when boundaries were crossed unfairly. And your survival alone embarrassed those who tried to erase you. All of these forces combined triggered someone capable to act, and the environment around you shifted immediately. This is the moment where the exposure phase ends. You are no longer being tested, judged, or manipulated to see if you'll break. You've passed, and now someone powerful has stepped in to protect, stabilize, and correct the imbalance that has existed for far too long. From this point forward, the energy around you moves differently. Doors open, opposition falters, and influence starts aligning in your favor. Not by chance, not by luck, but because your integrity and endurance demanded it. This is a reminder that when you remain steady under pressure, the universe, or the right people within it, sees, measures, and responds. You don't need to fight every battle yourself. Sometimes your strength is enough to summon the protection you deserve. If this video resonated with you, make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated with more insights. Like this video to show your support. Leave a comment with your thoughts and experiences, and share it with someone who needs to hear this truth today. The shift is real, the protection is here, and now it's your time. God bless you.